My next guest is Dr. Rick Chromey. Dr. Chromey uses historical insight and cultural inspiration to empower audiences to rethink and reimagine how they lead, teach, pastor, and parent. With over 30 years of training experience, Dr. Chromey is a sought-after speaker both nationally and internationally. He has also penned over a dozen books on leadership, culture, history, classroom management, and creative communication, including his most recent book, GenTech, An American Story of Technology, Change, and Who We Really Are. Chromey enjoys collecting antique technology, pop culture, watching baseball, riding his motorcycle, traveling, and writing. He lives with his wife, Linda, an adorable dog, and an ornery cat in the small town outside of Boise, Idaho. Welcome to the podcast, Rick.
Hey, that's pretty good, Dana. You read it just like the way I wrote it.
Yeah.
Nice. All the proper inflections and, positive points you were making. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me on your show. Appreciate it.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Wow. Well, I've been teaching professionally for about 30 years now, and I spent about 15 of those years in the university, smaller. These are Christian colleges. That was my arena in particular. And there were a number of times when I was in the trenches, but probably the one that really kind of reminds me the most was when I moved to administration and found myself completely well, it was new. It was new to me. I was learning. There were some things I was learning, but in the end, the job didn't really fit. And as a consequence of that, I actually lost the job. And from that point forward, started to move into really a dark season of my life where I was, I really didn't have a position. I was overeducated. I had my doctorate. I was overexperienced. 45 years of age. I was also considered too old for a lot of this stuff. And so that was kind of my in the trenches moment where, there are a lot of times, day to day where you're dealing with grades and you're dealing with students in particular or parents. Even in the college environment, I still dealt with parents.
Yeah.
I mean, those things happen, but the bottom line is that it was probably that dark moment of the soul where I found myself completely out of education, wanting to be in it, and it just wasn't happening for me.
And so what happened when you got laid off? Did you go back into teaching, and how did you kind of work your way back to where you are now?
Well, the reality is I never did get back into academia full time. I basically reinvented myself. Everybody, when I was a kid, I had teachers that told me that I had a big mouth. So I thought, well, maybe I'd find a way to make some money off that big mouth that I have. And I started reinventing myself as a writer and a speaker.
Okay.
I did some tutoring. I did some, substitute teaching along the way. I did some other types of the teaching, but I started educational services in 2017, a nonprofit work. And, I just kind of reinvented myself to where I was doing training. And, and then most recently I'm a historian and a speaker for American Cruise Lines. And I do lectures all summer long on the Columbia and Snake Rivers and the Pacific Northwest, talking about Lewis and Clark and the Oregon Trail. So that's how I recovered from that.
Yeah, and you said that just through some of your speaking experiences that you got connected with somebody who put you in touch with the cruise line, correct?
Yeah. Well, the cruise line kind of came out of, I was looking for a second job last spring, trying to, we're all having a little bit of a pinch right now with our finances due to inflation and fuel costs. And I was just looking for, well, is there a second job out there that I would enjoy? I want to do something that I enjoy. And I was watching Antiques Roadshow one night on PBS, and here was a commercial for American Cruise Lines. And the next thing I know, I'm clicking on the links and find that they're looking for guest speakers. And wow, okay, well, I can do that. And, this summer I got a master's degree in Lewis and Clark history and Oregon Trail history with the studies that I did for that in order to be prepared as a speaker. But it just kind of happened. That one did. But a lot of my work has been by having doors open because of degrees, because of experience, and things just kind of happen that way. But
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had a wealth of experience in kind of different levels. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of your philosophies on behavior first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the generational gap in GenTech, your book. But let's talk about just motivation of students, because that's a big topic in classrooms and at schools today. And in your opinion, how can students be motivated authentically and honestly, and how do we motivate learning naturally?
Yeah, and that is really my heartbeat message to
Mm-hmm.
teachers, and not just teachers, but leaders, anybody who leads another person. Let's just say, use the word influences another person.
Yeah.
Teachers obviously influence, parents influence, employers influence. So this goes across the board. It's really how to motivate anyone, anywhere, anytime. But several years ago, I was becoming convicted of my bribery approach to motivating, learning and
Mm-hmm.
basically behavior, and what I mean by that is I was the king of the gimmicks. I'll
Yeah.
give you this, I'll give you this if you do this, and if you do it right, if you do it perfectly, I'll give you this. And I kind of became convicted of that. So I did a heart search, I did a soul search, and I did a real introspective look at my craft of teaching, and I put together what I call the growls,
Okay.
GROWLS. And I think the reason I got that on that acronym was because I was hungry, Dana. I was actually hungry at that moment, and I felt my stomach growl a bit that day. And I was thinking about these internal needs. I was reading William Glasser's control theory. I was looking at the stages or the steps of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and such. And so I was really studying internal needs, not the
Okay.
external, internal. And it was from that I developed this acronym of the growls. And I'll just give them to you briefly and let you chew on which ones you want to talk about from there. But basically, these are 6 inner needs that every person has. But when you think about it from a student in the classroom, they really can be important to producing positive learning and a productive learning environment. The G is grace.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a religious word. I'm a pastor, so I come out of a religious background, but I think deep down we all want some grace, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the idea of unconditional, unmerited favor. It's surprise, it's beauty. Grace is just kind of a beautiful word, and I think in the learning environment, this is the hardest one to develop
Yeah.
because it kind of sprouts naturally. But if you got your antenna up and you're constantly working towards environments of grace, you can produce them, and it's very attractive to the learner. The others are more tangible.
Yeah.
The R is relationship. Deep down, we have to have positive and productive relationships in the classroom, with whether it's peer to peer, whether it's between the student and the teacher, whether it's between teachers and the parents. I mean, these relationships all work together to
Mm-hmm.
create learning. The O is ownership. This breaks down to choice, breaks down to being in control. Students want to have some control. They want to have some contribution really
Mm-hmm.
to learning. And this could be a little bit difficult because of the curriculum. A lot of times in education, the curriculum is in control,
Yeah.
but the wise teachers, the smart teachers, the great teachers know how to make that curriculum that they're using not be the one in control, but allows the student to have some control in that process as well. The W is worth. Deep down, we all want to be valued. We all want to be validated. We all want to have a voice. We want to have a vision that's accepted, that's anointed, that's affirmed, however you want to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about those 4 environments, grace, relationship, ownership, and worth, GROW, what's that spell?
Oh.
Grow, right. Yeah. If you want to grow your classroom, if you want to grow your students, focus on these needs. These are the power
Yeah.
needs. These are the power needs. These are the ones that really ignite and attract. So grace, relationship, ownership, worth. The L and the S, I call them the primitive needs. These are the
Okay.
most basic needs of all. L is laughter. We all
Mm-hmm.
want to be in environments that are pleasing and pleasurable. Entertaining, yes. And I call it edutrainment. That's what we do in the classroom is we
Yeah.
do edutrainment or edutainment. You know,
Yeah.
we use pleasure as a way of exploding the neurons in the brains. We know that when our brains are learning in a fun way, an enjoyable way, that they're literally lighting up like a Christmas tree. And then there's the S. This is
Mm.
the one that Maslow and Glasser both hit upon. That's security. Deep down, we want to feel secure, secure in the classroom, emotionally, physically, mentally, and such. And so it's why we can't have bullies in the classroom. You know, we have to watch that emotional climate in the classroom because that all shuts down the learning process. When you're afraid in the classroom, you're not going to be learning. When you're worried in the classroom, you're not going to be learning. When you're under stress in the classroom, you're not going to be learning.
Yeah.
So those are the primitive needs. So I don't know where you want to go from there, but that's the 6 needs laid out. I call them the growls. They're internal. You got to feed them. You create environments. You don't massage the message. You feed the environment.
Well, from what I'm understanding, if you don't fulfill these needs, that's why children and teens act up in the classroom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. You will have misbehavior as a result
Yeah.
of these needs not being met. That goes without saying.
And is this something that teachers, like you've mentioned a couple of authors, how can they educate themselves more on really working to fulfill these needs? Because we talk a lot about social emotional learning these days, trauma core practices. What you're talking about covers some of those things, but you've added some more, things to think about here. So, what would be a first step for a teacher to do to basically learn more about how to implement this in their classroom?
I think it starts by just being aware,
Yeah,
Dana.
yeah,
I mean, awareness is 90% of the solution here. For me, once I landed on this and it
yeah.
became concrete, I literally walk when let's just take a substitute situation because I get, when I'm substituting, I'm walking often into a classroom that I don't know these students at all.
Mhm.
I'm really at a disadvantage because, and every student knows that, by the way, substitute teaching is very, very hard for that reason. But when I walk into the classroom, I'm thinking these particular needs. And in particular, I'm thinking of the primitive ones to start with. You know, when that first 3 minutes I'm in the classroom, I'm thinking about how can I help them to feel secure with me? How can I create security here? And how can I make it be a pleasurable moment where they're going to go, hey, listen, this guy's a little different in a good way. You know, he's
Yeah.
fun. He's enjoyable. I think I'm gonna let him have a moment. I'm gonna let him have his moment. And I got to tell you, then if you start building relationships, and that's one of the things I do as a substitute teacher. Yes, I've got the lesson I have to get across, but I work very hard to learn their names. I always tell
Mhm.
teachers that's your first job as a teacher is to learn your students' names, because the name itself is so powerful for that
Mhm.
relationship moment. If you know a student's name, they are drawn to you just because of the fact their name, and then you just get to know them personally. What do you like? And if I can do that in an hour of a classroom,
Mhm.
plus give them moments of affirmation, try to do that as personally as possible. You can't do that with everybody, but you try to create these environments. I've done that as a substitute teacher. I've done it with my teaching staff over the years. I've done it with various students from kindergarten students all the way up to college, even graduate students that I teach now. In the online environment can be done this way.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So you can really fit that into any context, as you're
Mhm.
saying. Making that effort, even as a daily sub, goes a long way.
Yeah.
And, having them have a good day when the teacher's out. Let's shift a little bit and talk about leadership styles. So you talk about different teaching styles, but you align them towards like game show host and give them different names. So how do these styles cooperate and create conflict?
Well, yeah, we are shifting gears at this point, aren't
Good.
we? Yeah, this is another part of my study over the years.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated with the psychology of the classroom and the development of leaders. I'm a leadership guy anyway.
Yeah.
I'm a leader of leaders. I'm a teacher of teachers. So I enjoy just pulling the curtain back, if you will, about and answering that big question: Who am I? And not just answering it, who am I, but why am I? Why do I do the
Yeah.
things that I do? And when it comes to this particular area, we're talking about style or personality. It can be one of those things that people can get a lot of confusion. There can be a lot of difficulty understanding it, mostly because I think there are people out there that try to make it hard. I mean, some of the names we have, I mean, when you look at personality styles and leadership styles and teaching styles, I mean, you got animals out there. I mean, I'm a dog and you're a cat, or I'm the color orange and you're the color yellow. And then you ask somebody, well, what in the world does that even mean?
Yeah.
And they go, I don't know, but I'm a yellow, and that's all that matters. I'm a yellow, yay,
Yeah.
yellow. And so here's the bottom line. When you look at people throughout the course of history, when you look at them in the present, when you look at them psychologically and physiologically, they really only break down into two main areas. They're either an active personality or they're a passive personality. They're
Okay.
either extroverted or introverted. I mean, and you may have ranges in those directions, but they lean either one way or the other. So you're either
Yeah.
extroverted or introverted, active, passive. That's one way. The other way is more about how you process information, how you accept, how you move information and stuff through the brain. And in that way, you can either be more cognitive or emotive. You can be more sequential or, just differing, having more, just more, I lost my word there that I like to use, but you bounce around. It's not a sequential idea. And so when I break these down, I break them down into these four areas because they create literally a nice little four area matrix, if you will. And so if you look at the emotive, active type of a person, and let's look at it in the concept of teaching, since that's our
Okay.
topic today, you have what I call a game show host type of teacher. These
Hmm.
are emotive teachers. They're very connected to the emotional connections in the room, but they're also active, and because of that they can be a little bit flighty. Sometimes these type of teachers have almost an ADD perspective themselves, where squirrel, and they're gone. They like to chase rabbits and such, but they do it for the purpose of learning. They believe, and I think rightly so, this is their style, that if they can inspire, because this is their major strength, they are able to inspire, and students that follow them love these type of teachers. They're inspirational. The only problem is sometimes they don't always lead in a way that's productive, that
Hmm.
goes along with the curriculum, you might say. On
Hmm.
the other side of the active angle of it, you have what I call the chef. The
Okay.
chef is all about achievement. It's all about getting the job done. They're active, they're mission oriented, and they're sequential. So they have the ability. These type of students and teachers as well, they have the ability to see the process. They see the plan. They see you got to do this first and this first and this first. And that's why they love things like syllabi. They love ordered learning. They love to see structure in the classroom.
Hmm.
The sequentials do. And I call this one the chef. Chefs are all about recipes.
Yeah.
They want to cook by the recipe. They don't want to get off recipe. They know exactly what the recipe is. They stay on task with it and they get it done, because the whole thing is about achieving, getting that food out to the table and making it good. So those are the active sides of the leadership or the teaching style. On the passive side, you have the passive or the sequential passive. I call the stage manager,
Okay.
and this is interesting because the stage managers, if you think about them as a type of personality, they're not on stage. They don't like the stage. The game show host is all about the stage. Stage manager is backstage, but they have something in their hand that is critical to the success of the play, and that's
Mhm.
called the script.
Okay.
And If you've ever been in theater, you know what I'm talking about. Your stage managers constantly are saying to you, stay on script. Directors are
Yeah.
doing that too. But the stage managers are the one that when you get backstage and you've gone off script a little bit, they'll let you know. And that's what this type of personality does too. They're passive. They're the ones that will sit at a teacher's meeting and not say a word. But they're analyzing every single thing. They're taking notes on every single thing. These are the type of students that will sit in your class and they'll take notes and they sit in the same seat every single day. They like to have that conformity. They like that sameness, if you will, to the classroom. And these teachers are the same way. Now, the emotive passive teacher is the one that I call the counselor. They're
Okay.
very to relationships in the room again. That's that emotional side. They like the relationships, but they don't like risk. This idea they tend to be, because they're emotive and because they're passive, they don't like risk. They don't like anything that might cause failure. They don't like anything that might cause trouble. And if you start thinking about these, and this is where conflict comes in, counselors and the chefs are directly opposite of each other. They have nothing in common. So when you look at them, you can see why if you have a chef teacher and you have a counselor's type of student, someone who's a passive emotive student, how that chef can actually crush that student. They can literally crush it. It's my way or the highway. If you can't get on board, get out of here. You can see how a chef can become very abusive even in how they teach. Doesn't have to be. The chefs are about achievement. The stage managers are about insight. They love insight. They love thinking about stuff. The counselor is about cooperation. And again, that game show host is about inspiration, but you can see that battle there. On the other side, you put a game show host. I always say it's probably a good idea if you want to see this work. It's not a bad idea either to put a game show host teacher in the same classroom with a stage manager teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you think about opposites, just like in a marriage relationship, we tend to be attracted to our opposite. And that's because we're looking for the weaknesses to be filled. What is weak here, the other person can make that a strength. And that's what happens when you put a stage manager and a game show host together. They fill each other's strengths, but they'll also battle like cats and dogs in the process. And the game show host will be all over the map. He'll be about inspiration. No, we got to do this because, hey, it's from the heart here. And the stage manager is going, no, think about this a little bit. Don't jump off the cliff yet. We don't need to do that yet in this situation. So, I mean, you can see how this plays out in the conflicts that start to emerge. And I like my teachers to think of it from this perspective. You have a style and so do your students. And if you can figure out which students you're battling, they probably have the opposite learning style as your teaching style. So if you got a game show host, they're going to have a lot of problems with a stage manager student. They just don't mix. It's like oil and water.
Yeah, and that's something a lot of administrators don't necessarily think of, is like really identifying the teachers or the staff learning styles, and this really puts it into perspective. I can see different personalities come to mind when you talk about these styles, so it's really interesting. Let's shift again and talk a little bit about your book called GenTech, which you have displayed there on the screen. And you talk about different generations, and I wanted to kind of stick with the generation of the last 30 years. So you have the net generation, those born since 1990. You have the iTech generation, those born since 2000, and the robo generation, those born since 2010. So what are the implications for employers, educators, and other organizational leaders for people within these generations?
Well, before I dive into the implications and applications of this, let me kind of reframe and give the reasons why we have to think differently. The whole reason I wrote GenTech was because I've been doing generational analysis. I'm a cultural historian, by the way. That's where my doctorate is at. I've studied, in that case, it was leadership in the emerging culture. So I'm a cultural historian. And I've been studying generations really since 1980. So it's been almost
Mhm.
40 years of looking at generations. I know I don't look that old, but I really am. I've been seeing it for a long time, talking about it for a long time. And when I first got into it, it was because there was this new generation that was being born called the millennials. Now, we didn't call millennials back then. We didn't really
Yeah.
call them anything. We didn't know what to call them. Eventually, they were nicknamed Generation Y, but even that was a 90s type of moniker.
Yeah.
There was a book in 1991 by William Strauss and Neil Howe called Generations, and they used the word millennials to describe this subset of kids born since, in their case, 1982. But you know, what happened in the 90s was we had a fast track. You know, at that point, it became very popular to have all the generations named. Baby
Yeah.
boomers had to have a name, Gen X had to have a name, millennials, you know, and then by 1995, we were already putting a name on the next generation. We call them Gen Z. They were still in diapers.
Yeah.
And my argument's always been that you really can't tell the characteristics or even name a generation till they've had at least 10 years after their
Yeah.
birth. You got to give them some
Yeah.
time. You know, baby boomer works because there was time there. We can go, oh yeah, the demographics. There was a baby boom, you know, back in the early 40s that helped us out here. Gen X, nobody really understands Gen X. That was a Gen X is one of those monikers that just got slapped on our generation because it's like napalm, you know, getting put on you. You know, it just stuck. And what are you going to do with it? But it means nothing. When you
Yeah.
think about Gen X, what does it actually mean? Nothing.
Yeah.
Millennials at least have some meaning. It was to target those kids that were going to graduate in the year 2000. So they were millennial kids. Okay, I get that. That makes sense. But Gen Z comes along and it's like, whoa. So by the early 2000s, by the mid 2000s, I realized that they weren't Gen Z at all. I mean, those kids, especially those ones born after the year 2000, they were being impacted by particular technology. I call them the I technologies, the
Mhm.
iPod, the iPad, the
Yeah.
iTunes, the iPhone, social media. So that was more appropriate. If you want to understand generations, look at them. And this is what my book is all about, Dana. It's about saying, hey, listen, it's not a demographic. That's not what
Yeah.
makes you who you are. It's the technology that you come of age to.
Yeah.
So you come of age between the ages years 10 and 25.
Mhm.
So when you think about that, those 10 and 25, well, someone who's born in the 1950s and 1960s is going to experience those coming of age years with space and television. Someone coming of age in the 60s and 70s, like I did, you know, is going to experience maybe a little bit of space as well, but cable television, video games, those were the technology that kind of grooved our generation. Millennials were grooved by the cell phone, the personal computer, the internet. And then you get, you know, again to the year 2000, you're talking about the eye technologies. And then finally, in 2010, you know, because I wrote the book in 2019, I felt like now it's time to name this new generation. And if you're listening closely, you understand that I'm not putting generations back to back to back to back. As
Mhm.
classically it's done. You know, baby
Mhm.
boomers are born between these dates. And then the very next year, we have a new generation being born.
Uh-huh.
I don't agree with that. I think that's faulty assumption. I think it messes with a lot of stuff, and people who live on the edges do not like it. I'm born in 1963. Oh, I just gave
Mhm.
away my age. But I got to tell you, being born in 1963, I've always been called a baby boomer, and yet
Yeah.
I never felt a part of the baby boom
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've called this new generation, born since 2010, the robo generation, the
Uh-huh.
robotics generation. And it's because they're going to be framed in the next, really, they're being framed right now by it because they're 10 years into it.
Yeah.
So the youngest ones are already experiencing it. They're going to be framed by what I call the hair technologies. Now, that has nothing to do with my head up here. It has everything to do with HAIR. H
Okay.
is H is holographic technology, AI, artificial intelligence technology, and then the R is robotics. Those three technologies are going to revolutionize learning. Let's just keep it on the learning
Mhm.
focus right now. Education is going to totally be transformed in the next 10 years around
Yeah.
holographic, artificially intelligent, robotic technologies. And from there we can go a number of different ways, but that's really why I wrote the book. Was I was frustrated at this whole idea that we're naming kids after the alphabet here. In fact, the newest generation, when I was doing research for the book, I said, what are we calling this new generation born since 2005, 2010, however you want to put it? And they're calling them the alpha generation. We're literally going back to the beginning of the alphabet. That's the A generation. I'm going X, Y, Z, A, it just doesn't make any sense, Dana. And that's why most authors write books. We're just mad. We're just mad.
Well, I mean, you've given a lot of information kind of on how these decades, you kind of mentioned since 2000, what's framed by those decades and what people are coming of age with. You said that a generation is framed by the cultural shifts, and that it's more than a micro shift. So as you think about this robo generation, I mean, and then maybe even the generation that has, people that are being born now that, have been born since the 2020s, right?
Yeah.
What do we call that? The pandemic generation? I mean, what are we thinking about, like, in terms of like changes, like, what's at the forefront, right? Because we still can't predict, like you said, what the hair technologies, how those are going to play out by the time students born in 2010 graduate from high school, by the time they're in college, right? But so it's kind of, it's an interesting topic to think about, like, like you said, it's kind of better to name them after they've been around for a while.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And let me, I want to make sure I'm clear here. Yeah. I believe a generation is framed by the technology they come of age to. Now, when you talk about cultural shifts, we have cultural shifts all the time. We have generational shiftings that go on. And in fact, when you think about analyzing generations, I often say it's not what you remember, it's what you don't remember that kind of demarcates your generation. Yeah. For example, the generation that I call the iTechs and even the robotics generation, but let's just take the iTechs, those born since the year 2000, they do not remember September 11th, 2001. It will not be in their frame. They will not have that. When you look at millennials, they don't recall the Challenger exploding in 1986. They were too young for that. The Challenger explosion was something that was not in their frame of reference. But for those of us who lived through it, we remember it well, how we remember where we were at. Mm-hmm. This is why I was never a baby boomer. I do not remember John F. Kennedy's assassination. Mm-hmm. Every baby boomer remembers where they were at when that assassination happened. Yeah. And of course, the baby boomers themselves don't remember the end of World War II, the bomb falling on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the atomic bomb. So, we all have these generational marker events that kind of define us. And so when you look at them, there are certain types of cultural shiftings that go on. And, really with this youngest generation, I'm not prepared yet. I don't think you can really start making hard and fast, rules as far as of the coming of age, because when you look at coming of age, that's 10 to 25. That means the ones that are born at the end of the 20-year period, it still goes out another 25 years after that. So like my book, it starts in 1900, but it goes to the year 2055, because that's when the robo generation born in 2010 finally finishes coming of age as young adults. That's a long time in the future. So it's hard to be prescriptive. It's hard to be a more than maybe a forecaster. And it's definitely why I don't name a generation until myself anyway, in my context, until, about 2030, we should be able to see what type of technologies are now emerging for those being born post-COVID. Who knows what that could be? That could be a technology not even invented yet. That is coming, transformative in that way. I do know this, Dana. I do know this. Every technology that I find in the book, with the exception of one, every technology is a communication type of technology. We have been
Mhm.
transformed by the technologies where we communicate with one another. The only generation that's not had that was the very first one. They were a transportation and telephone tech type of generation, 1900 to 1920. It was transportation, automobiles. And really, you could make an argument if you wanted to that generation also, because the automobile, the airplane shortened distances, it allowed people to communicate and really get outside their boxes and connect in a different way. I'm not hard and fast that isn't a type of communication as well. But when you look at the other ones, it's they're wrapped around things like the telephone again, or motion picture, or radio, or television. Even space had the satellite, the communication technology, cable television, internet, cell phone, those are all communication technologies.
Mhm.
Even artificial intelligence is about technology that communicates with us, that
Mhm.
learns from us. It is
Well,
fascinating.
yeah, you talked a little bit about like maybe something will be marked, by the pandemic occurring either medically or just kind of shifts in the way people are thinking in terms of climate change and other things that are hot topics today. But do you think the pandemic has increased the likelihood for generational shifts to happen in terms of how you're naming the generations? Um, how might that occur in the future? And do you maybe think you would be writing a follow up?
Well, again, as a historian, we look back and we look
Yeah,
for patterns.
yeah.
That's what a weather forecaster does, is he looks back for patterns in the weather, and that's what a historian does. That's what a
Hmm.
futurist does. I've been called a
Yeah,
futurist as well. And here's my take on that. I don't think there's been any type of fast tracking.
yeah,
I felt back in the year 2000, in the early 2000s, that there was something big that was going to come, that was going to rapidly move us to a digital cyber culture.
yeah.
I didn't know what it was. I thought it might be an economic crash of some sort,
Hmm.
something that would change how we communicated, how we interacted, and such. Maybe a certain type of maybe a war or something. That's what does it in the past. Those type of events, but I did not expect a virus to do it. That was something that kind of. But I've been predicting something was going to move us this way. So these type of shifts, and we've been moving towards a wholly digital culture since the 1990s, really, since the 1980s. Millennials, that generation also has a very strong digital component to them. But they were pre-internet. The cyber communications, they eventually evolved things like social media. And we do everything now by the internet. Even education is done by the internet, online learning. In the year 2000, I was working at a school, and we had a conversation about this. And I asked this, we were thinking about what should we be in the year 2020. And I told the school, which was a very small school at that time, what we ought to do is we ought to sell off all of our buildings and reinvest it into technology and become the first school in our area that uses online learning. Let's be the leader in online learning, because by the year 2020, Wired magazine, even in the year 2000, it was like 95% of students in the year 2000 went to brick and mortar schools. Only 5% did any type of online learning. And they predicted by 2020, it would flip. That whole number
yeah,
would flip.
yeah,
95% would be online. And that was fascinating to me, because
yeah,
if you have that type of a flip, that means the brick and mortar school is on, I would say right now it's on notice. Um, I personally don't know and don't believe probably in 30 years we'll have a brick and mortar school environment. That's my thinking on this. We are moving towards and into a digital world. We're seeing the book is disappearing like crazy. I know you got books behind you in your in your thing, and I love books. I have books all over this office in here, but the book is disappearing and it's being replaced by digital formats. And that's good, because you can
yeah.
put a lot of books in a backpack
Hmm.
you can carry it in
Hmm.
your phone now. You can carry
Yeah,
your
yeah.
library on your phone.
Yeah,
It's
well, it's like you say, like, everybody was thrust into online learning because of the virus, but also the fact that even though, students are that we still have a lot of students that choose to do online, or they feel like online learning is best for their learning needs. But even in a brick and mortar school, like I work in, students, if a student says, well, my computer's dead, or, it's not working, it's like, well, you need it because like the assignments are on the computer. You submit the assignments via Google Slides. You have to, you have to have tech to do, like, you have the teacher, you have the discussions, in person with your classmates, but when you're doing the writing, not very much of that's in paper. And most districts had already gone to one-to-one devices even before the pandemic, but definitely now everybody has a device. And if you don't have your computer charged and ready to go at the beginning of the school day, it's not easy. So
you basically got a brick.
yeah,
a doorstop.
And that's the way of the old books. Like, teachers used to teach out of textbooks, and now a lot of them are just using Google Slides and embedding, videos or other resources. And in a way, I see, that's an easier way for students to grasp the information from wherever they're at. They don't have to carry a textbook home, because when I started teaching, that was, a lot of people were bound to the textbook. But I also see it as a way for students, especially when you're looking at middle schoolers, they try to copy, a lot of plagiarism going on, right? If they're getting information from the teacher's slides or from the website, really not writing enough in their own words. So that's kind of,
well, I give you a thought on that, because it's interesting that in education, we're almost like out of step with the rest of the world on some things. And this is a classic example that I think maybe we need to rethink. Think about cheating on tests. I mean, you think about people cheating, and in education, that's terrible. That's anathema. We don't want our students cheating. But when they graduate and go out into the real world, that's called creative collaboration. It's not called cheating anymore. The ability to find the answer from your peers is something that you want. So I actually started doing that with some of my testing, low-level testing in college. I started playing around. I had a test where it was very heavy on content, heavy on content and what they need to know. And about 5-10 minutes into the test, it was a final exam type of thing. I'd say, time out. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. You can go to anybody else in this room right now and see if you can get the right answer for the questions that you have. You've got 3 minutes. And what was interesting is about a third of the students said, no way, I'm not going to do this at all. This doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Another third of the students were like, yeah, oh my goodness, they're all over that one because they didn't have the answers. And then you had a third that were like, okay, this is interesting. But what happened afterwards was I used it as a teaching moment to say, listen, in real life, it is more important for me to teach you how to connect and network and find those answers, to critically think. Because in the end, you may find an answer, but that doesn't mean it's the right answer.
Yeah.
Just because you have a friend who has an answer on his paper that you think is right, doesn't mean that answer is right. So you have to be able to critically think. And that's what we have to do as educators today. We have all sorts of information. What is right information? What is correct?
Yeah. What's the right information? I mean, a lot of students will just half-heartedly read content and then think they have the right information because they saw it somewhere, but it's not necessarily right. So it's definitely a lot to think about. And you've given a lot of information about just different areas that you're passionate about, and the book that you've written, and what we can think about as educators in terms of our learning styles. Out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Well, there are probably several things I could say, but in lieu of our conversations here, I would say scratch your niche. Scratch your niche. Find what you do well. Find who are you? Discover and just scratch that niche.
Yeah.
And probably along with that, I say think small today. In a big way, a lot of times what we do is we try to think big, but in our postmodern, post everything culture, post COVID culture, small is going to be tall.
Yeah.
The speed is going to be to the small. If you go to Starbucks, you already know this. you go to Starbucks and order a small coffee, you have to say, I want a tall. All right. So
Yeah.
small is tall already at Starbucks. They figured it out. But that's going to be the context of learning. It's going to be about small communities. It's going to be about small conversations. It's going to be about small insights and discoveries that are going to spark revolutions, that are going to transform cultures. That's really where we need to be. Think small, scratch your niche.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think those are great words to remember. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
rickchromey.com is probably the best place to connect with me. And I do teacher training. I'd love to come to your school. I'd love to come to your conference and deliver some of these. These are actually all different types of workshops that I do. I would love to be a part of that with you. Please think about that. In fact, what I'd like to do for everybody who's listening today is give you a free digital copy of my book, GenTech. And Dana's going to have the link there. And all you have to do is click on that link and download it. And if you like what you see, make it a Christmas gift. And you can order books from me personally that are autographed. I
Mhm.
actually even cover the postage. But if you go through rickchromey.com, you can order a book there and I'll get it to you. You can also order it at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other fine places that carry great books like GenTech.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today, learning more about generation change and um, personalities in education and all these different things we've talked about. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Dana.